Good afternoon. The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. O. Henry was the pen name of the American writer William Sidney Porter, who was born in 1862 and died in 1910. He is largely recognized for his short stories. He was born on September 1862 in North Carolina. He tried his hand at several places, ranging from sheep ranches to banks and drug stores, and even composing sketches until he discovered his calling as a writer in 1894. He launched the Rolling Stone, a weekly humorous publication. Porter began working as a reporter, columnist, and sporadic cartoonist for the Houston Post after that endeavor failed. The early 20th century serves as the backdrop for the majority of Porter's stories. His stories frequently take place in New York City, which he clearly loved. The author is famous for the unexpected ending that his stories contain. The given story, that is the gift of the Magi, it is the story of poor husband and wife, Jim and Della. Both of them they are very proud of their possessions. Following the example of the three wise men known as the Magi, who came with gifts for the infant Christ from the east, the husband and wife decide to give a gift to each other on the Christmas Eve. The story has surprise ending which shows their deep love for each other. Such is the story by our writer O. Henry. Now we will see. Before starting, we will see about the text. That is, the New York Sunday. The world originally published The Gift of the Magi in 1905. The story is a prime instance of social realism. The young couple at the story's core is struggling to make ends meet because they lack sufficient income. One recurring element in literature from the Victorian era was the realistic depiction of average people striving to earn living. As with previous Victorian era works, The Gift of the Magi concludes with a moral lesson for the reader. In the well-known narrative, Della sails her stunning past the knee hair for $20 so she may purchase her husband the ideal gift. A platinum fob watch chain that is simple and chaste in design properly proclaimed its value by fateful Christmas Eve. Jim presents tortoise shell combs for Della's lovely locks, combs that she longed for, that he had bought after time. Before it, he has bought after selling his watch as a gift in kind. Readers are brought back to the time honored ironic twist that defines O. Henry's work, that the real meaning of Christmas by it. The story's essence persists despite the typical Christmas sentiment it carries. Such is the information about our text. Now we have to see the gift of the Magi. $1.87. That was all she had put it aside. 1 cent and then another and then another in her careful buying of meat and other food. Della counted it 3 times. $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. There was nothing to do but fall on the bed and cry. So Della did it while the lady of the home is slowly growing quieter. We can look at the home. Furnished rooms at a cost of $8 a week. There is little more to say about it. In the hall below was a letter box too small to hold a letter. There was an electric bell, but it could not make a sound. Also, there was a name beside the door, Mr. James Dillingham Young. When the name was placed there, Mr. James Dillingham Young was being paid $30 a week. Now, when he was being paid only $20 a week, the name seemed too long and important. It should perhaps have been Mr. James D. Young. But when Mr. James Dillingham Young entered the furnished room, his name became very short indeed. Mr. James Dillingham Young put her arms warmly about him and called him, Jim, you have already met her, she is Della. Della finished her crying and cleaned the marks of it from her face. She stood by the window and looked out with no interest. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87, that is $1.87, with which to buy Jim a gift. She had put aside as much as she could for a month. With this result, $20 a week is not much. Everything had cost more than she had expected. It always happened like that. Only $1.87 to buy a gift for Jim. Her Jim, she had many happy hours planning something nice for him, something nearly good enough, something almost worth the honor of belonging to Jim. There was a looking glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen the kind of looking glass that is placed in $8 furnished rooms. It was very narrow. A person could see only a little of himself at a time. However, if he was very thin and moved very quickly, he might be able to get a good view of himself. Della, being quite thin, had mastered this art. Suddenly, she turned from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face had lost its color. Quickly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall on its complete length. The James Dillingham Young were very proud of two things which they owned. One thing was Jim's gold watch. He had once belonged to his it had once belonged to his father, and long ago it had belonged to him, father's father. The other thing was Dela's hair. If a queen had lived in the room near theirs, Dela would have washed and dried her hair where the queen could see it. Dela knew her hair was more beautiful than any queen's jewels and gifts. If a king had lived in the same house with all his riches, Jim would have looked at his watch every time they met. Jim knew that no king had anything so valuable than Jim's watch. So now Dela's beautiful hair fell about her, shining like a falling stream of brown water. It reached below her knee. It almost made itself into a dress of her. And then she put it up on her head again, nervously and quickly. Once she stopped for a moment and stood still while a tear or two ran down her face. She put on her old brown coat. She put on her old brown hat. With the bright light still in her eyes, she moved quickly outdoor and down to the street where she stopped. The sign said, Mrs. Sophronic Hair Article of all kinds. This is the first part of the gift of the Magi, where we have the information about Dela, who is the wife of Mr. Jim. Dela counted the here in the initial part. We have the information that it is the story of poor husband and wife, Jim and Dela. Both of them were very proud of their possessions, and Dela, in the initial part, we have the Dela counted the money that she had saved through hard bargaining. It was only $1.87. She counted it 3 times, and then she wanted to buy a present for her husband on the Christmas evening. She did not know what to do with this amount. She sat on the sofa. She was very nervous and cried. Sobs had become a part of her life. Jim and Dela lived in a flat on rent. They had to pay $8 every week. The flat was in a bad condition and could not be described. It seemed as if it belongs to beggars. They lived a hand-to-mouth life. Outside the flat, a card was put on with the name of the tenant, Mr. James Dillingham Young. James was paid a salary of $30 per week previously, but now his salary was cut to $20 per week. This compelled the couple to live a very modest life, but it did not affect their love for each other as Dela welcomed Jim with a warm hug. When she returned home after work, Dela cried for something and hid her face. She stood by the window thinking hard as to what she could purchase with $1.87 to give a gift to Jim on the Christmas Eve. She wanted to buy something fine to be proud of his possession. She looked at the reflection in the pier glass between the windows of the room. An idea came to her mind and her eyes shone brighter. But her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. She quickly pulled down her hair and let it fall off to its full length. The youngs took pride two possessions. One was Jim's watch that he inherited from his father and grandfather. The other was Della's hair. She had long, beautiful hair that reached below her knees and covered her like a dress or like a garment. For a minute, Della hesitated. A tear or two fell down on her cheeks. She put on her dress and hat, and with a sparkle in her eyes, she went to Madame Saffron's hair goods shop. This is the story of very poor couple, Jela and Jim, where they were living in a rented flat. And initially we found that Della was very nervous. The Jim's earning was $30 per week, but later on it was changed to $20 per week. In such a situation, they were living in that rented flat. Now we have to move towards the remaining part or the climax of the story. With this, I conclude. We will continue the same in the next lecture. Okay, thank you. Good day.